Well, yes, as we all know, the Electoral College for the presidential election comprises not just of members of parliament, but also the members of the legislative assemblies. There's a formula inside the constitution which clearly prescribes how, in fact, each assembly's vote is to be weighed in terms of its importance. So each assembly vote, depending on the size of the assembly and population, will have, in fact, a different weightage and also a different value. Now, that is a process in which the votes are counted, as well as the fact that the larger states will, of course, in that sense, have a bigger say as far as this presidential election is concerned. Now, having said that, the fact is that with this nomination filing, the formal part of the campaign for the president's election will begin, and we will see, in fact, in coming days, the campaigning beginning. Ajay Shekhawat, of course, one of the ministers who's very closely associated, of course, Bhupendra Yadav, another senior minister who's associated with this entire presidential poll. And from here on, of course, we will have to see how the voting does eventually take place. Remember, in this election, no whip can be issued by any political party within, in fact, the treasury benches. That is very clearly on display, and as far as the alliances in different states are concerned. So very, very big, as you were rightly mentioning over there, with the Prime Minister, of course, himself leading the way as far as the presidential nomination of Droupadi Murmu is concerned.
Absolutely, and live images right now, Madhav, coming in on our screen of how they have reached the place where shortly from now we're expecting the presidential nominations to be filed, the papers will be signed. But once again, taking our viewers through why Murmu's candidature matters. Because if elected, she could become the first tribal president of India, and she will also be the second ever female president that our country will see. She could also become the first president from the state of Odisha, which is also of significance, and she's also been the first ever woman governor of Jharkhand as well, Madhav, and the first ever tribal from Odisha appointed as the governor.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, many firsts over there as far as Droupadi Murmu is concerned. Someone who, in fact, as the leaders of the BJP have been mentioning, comes from very humble origins. And of course, even after her nomination papers being, or her nomination being announced, the papers, of course, which are being filed at the also talking about as well. So what, of course, is that key is will they
All right, we'll try to go back to Madhav shortly, but certainly the Prime Minister, through a tweet, has said that Droupadi Murmu's presidential nomination has been appreciated across India by all sections of society. He also went on to say that her understanding of grassroots problems and vision for India's development is outstanding, and certainly going all out with their support. We have the senior NDA leaders in the presence of the Prime Minister himself inside the Parliament today. And going back to Madhav once again. So Madhav, we saw how the Prime Minister praised Droupadi Murmu for devoting her life to serving society, empowering the poor from the background she came from.
Well, absolutely. The Prime Minister, in fact, over there, talking about how she has worked for the downtrodden, how she has worked relentlessly and served as a legislator. In fact, winning in the Odisha Assembly the award of the best legislator as well, serving for many years in different departments as a minister, also in the Naveen Patnaik government when the BJP and the BJD were in alliance in the state of Odisha. So a very important fact that she is somebody who has a proven track record in credentials, not just in government work and government service, but also in holding constitutional office and that of the governor. And that light, of course, a befitting candidate is what the BJP and the NDA have been mentioning as far as Droupadi Murmu and her candidature is concerned. So, big moment at this point of time. Droupadi Murmu are set to become the next president of India, is what the BJP is saying, with the numbers very comfortably stacked up on their side, and also, in fact, hoping that in coming days they would be able to get support of other political parties such as because JMM, of course, is a party that has roots of course, very strong roots as far as the Adivasi and the tribal community is concerned, and also Chief Minister Hemant Soren of the JMM, who also has familial ties with the home state of Droupadi Murmu, that is Odisha. So in that light, of course, very significant developments likely to take place in terms of JMM, although JMM, despite being a very key member of the opposition alliance and the ruling party in the state of Jharkhand, has not yet come out and officially announced its support for Droupadi Murmu, although, of course, sources say that very
Right. So certainly the selection, Madhav, of Droupadi Murmu as the presidential candidate could also hit the opposition camp hard, which would now find it difficult not to support her, as she has been the governor of Jharkhand, a tribal majority state ruled by the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, that is the JMM, as you pointed out, which is also a UPA ally. Because remember, JMM being part of the opposition, expected to support Yashwant Sinha as the joint opposition candidate for the presidential polls. But Murmu, being a former Jharkhand governor, enjoys a cordial relation with the state government there. This could also put the JMM in a tight spot, and they could also be extending their support soon. So, Madhav, that's also an angle that the opposition might be hitting hard with.
Well, absolutely. In fact, Yashwant Sinha has come on record to say that he is going to try and convince the JMM to come up. But clearly, it's going to be very, very difficult for the JMM to justify supporting a non-Adivasi candidate when there is, in fact, a tribal candidate who is very much there. And that, of course, will have to be seen how that formally plays out in coming. But certainly, of course, very, very significant development, of course, in terms of political support. And the numbers, of course, stack up in favor of Droupadi Murmu at this point of time.
We'll try to go back to Madhav shortly, but we are staying with these live images on our screen right now coming in of the NDA. That is Droupadi Murmu being surrounded by senior BJP leaders, including the Prime Minister himself. We have JP Nadda, the national president of the BJP. We have Rajnath Singh, Union Minister Amit Shah, and several other leaders who are there to support the presidential nomination, which will be filed shortly from now. The process has begun because, remember, Droupadi Murmu is also a strong administrative tribal leader. And Madhav, with this decision, the BJP is also trying to seek and strengthen its political hold in Odisha, and also gain their ground back in Jharkhand, where it lost elections in 2019. That's also a significance here.
Well, certainly for, in fact, over here in, as far as BJP is concerned, certainly, of course, a huge, huge gesture as far as the state of Odisha is concerned. And also, of course, it's a development that will have massive impact in several of the eastern parts, eastern states in the country, because
Absolutely. So we are seeing as to how there is a massive show of strength by the NDA. This is NDA's pick, that is Droupadi Murmu now filing her nomination in the parliament in the presence of the Prime Minister himself, because remember, he had spoken and tweeted out as to how he believes that she is going to be an excellent president, and how her background and where she comes from will be immensely grateful, as well as in a way help several sections of the society as well. My colleague Mohit also joins us on this broadcast. And Mohit, the Prime Minister through that tweet also spoke about how her understanding of the grassroots problems and the vision for India's development is outstanding, and she has worked her way up, and that's the reason why the Prime Minister is strongly backing this candidature.
Well, you see, if you talk about Droupadi Murmu and her political life, personal life, I mean, despite hardships, she completed her studies, then she went to work as a teacher, then she got into active political life. She was the MLA from the BJP in Odisha. She then became the minister, and then she was sent to Jharkhand as the governor. Now, during her tenure as the government, we saw that how even the opposition parties over there, they were completely supportive of the working of the Droupadi Murmu, and then hence she has a vast political experience. She is said to be a very soft-spoken personality, and that is why she comes from the tribal community. This also shows the vision of the government that yes, they are working for the SC, ST, tribals and other communities for their upliftment, and the messaging on the ground is huge. You see, a political message, if you need to see this, it's also very huge that somebody who has come from such a humble background, who has worked hard her way to the top of the ladder. She has been given the candidature and the nomination from the NDA, and she comes from the tribal community. And it's not just that the being from the tribal community are just her credentials. She has worked she worked as a teacher. She has a vast political experience behind her. So all this compiled, she, according to the BJP and the NDA, was the best pick for the president. And also, if we talk about the opposition, various opposition leaders have come out, various opposition parties, in fact, have come out and they have said that they will be supporting the candidature of Draupadi Murmu because she is a tribal and she comes from a very humble background and she has worked her way to the top with her hard work. So it seems that if BJD, YSRCP, in fact, the JMM also, if they support the candidature of Draupadi Murmu, then easily she will sail through and she could be the next president of the country. Back to you in studio.
Absolutely, and we are seeing as to how the Prime Minister himself is now signing one of the papers. Remember, he's also one of the proposers, and that entire procedure of filing of the nomination now begins, even as we speak right now, Mohit, because remember, now we are seeing all the leaders standing up after the signing of the nomination and the Prime Minister being one of the first proposers. That's where the procedure begins.
Yes, in fact, and Prime Minister is the first proposer. The official nomination process, as you were saying, according to the visuals, has begun. And you see, there were almost 50 proposers for the name of Draupadi Murmu. And yesterday we saw at the residence of Prahlad Joshi, the election in charge, various leaders of the Bharatiya Janata Party, senior union ministers, and the chief ministers of the BJP ruled states went over there and they signed